Hello, my name is Jared Boss. In this video, I'm going to talk about systems theory and how it applies to social services using Shelley Smith-Acuna's systems theory in action. My goal here is not to just define systems theory, but to explain how it changes the way social workers understand clients, problems, and interventions, especially in complex practice settings. What stood out to me most in the text is how practical it is. Instead of presenting systems theory as something abstract or overly theoretical, Smith-Acuna frames it as a way of thinking that guides how practitioners observe, assess, and intervene in real situations. As I worked through the book, it became clear that systems theory isn't something you apply once. It's something that shapes how you constantly make sense of complex situations over time. From a social services perspective, this approach is especially useful when it shifts attention away from individual blame and toward the broader relational and environmental context surrounding a client. That shift is critical in social work and is especially relevant for substance use disorder work, where clients are often heavily stigmatized and viewed primarily through their behavior rather than their context. To understand why systems theory is so useful, Smith-Acuna first reframes how we think about problems. Rather than focusing on identifying causes or assigning responsibility, systems theory focuses on recognizing patterns over time. In practice, this means moving from the question, who caused the problem, to the question, what keeps this problem going? Smith-Acuna emphasizes that people don't operate in isolation. Behavior only really makes sense when it's understood in relation to other people, past experiences, or current environments. This reflects the system's concept of circular causality, where behavior both influences and is influenced by others in the system. This idea stood out to me in relation to substance use treatment. Substance use is often framed as an individual failure or lack of motivation, but systems theory highlights how use can be shaped and maintained by family dynamics, peer relationships, trauma histories, and environmental stressors. From this perspective, meaningful change doesn't require fixing a person, it requires shifting how the system responds and interacts around them. Once problems are understood as patterns, Smith-Acuna encourages practitioners to look more closely at how relationships are organized within the system. Families, for example, are made up of multiple subsystems, such as parent-child relationships, partner relationships, and sibling relationships. Each of these subsystems serves a purpose, and when they are clear and flexible, the system tends to function more effectively. Problems often arise when these relationships become strained, unclear, or overly rigid. In social services, and especially in substance use disorder work, this is often visible in families experiencing chronic stress. Substance use can disrupt roles within a family, sometimes leading partners or children to take on responsibilities that help the system survive in the short term but create long-term harm. Smith-Acuna's framework helped me understand that these role shifts are not random or malicious. They are often attempts by the system to maintain stability. By paying attention to these patterns, practitioners can respond with empathy instead of judgment. Rather than focusing only on individual substance use behavior, systems thinking encourages us to observe who responds to whom, how conflict or concern is expressed, and what happens when someone tries to change their role within the system. This broader view helps avoid oversimplifying complex family dynamics. As Smith-Acuna moves deeper into systems thinking, she places strong emphasis on boundaries. Boundaries shape how systems manage closeness, distance, and interaction with the outside world. One key insight from systems theory in action is that boundaries develop in response to a system's environment. They are not automatically healthy or unhealthy. Instead, they often reflect how a system has adapted to stress, risk, or instability. In substance use disorder work, this concept is especially important. Families may develop very rigid boundaries to protect themselves from chaos, or very diffuse boundaries to maintain connection. What might appear dysfunctional at first glance may once have been protective or even necessary. Understanding boundaries in this way reminds practitioners to slow down. Rather than immediately trying to correct behaviors, Smith-Acuna encourages us to understand what those boundaries have accomplished for the system and why they may be difficult to change. This leads directly into another core idea in Smith-Acuna's work: why systems resist change. Systems tend to settle into familiar patterns, a process known as homeostasis, or the tendency to maintain stability. Even when patterns are harmful, they can feel predictable and safer than change. When someone attempts to shift the system, such as entering treatment or reducing substance use, that change often triggers anxiety within the system. In systems terms, this pushback often occurs through feedback loops, where attempts at change are met with responses that pull the system back towards its previous state. In substance use treatment, this might show up as family resistance, relapse cycles, or pressure to return to familiar roles. Rather than viewing resistance as defiance or lack of motivation, Smith-Acuna's framework encourages practitioners to see it as normal system responses. This understanding supports more patient, realistic, and respectful interventions, which is especially important in long-term recovery work. Smith-Acuna is careful to point out that systems thinking applies even when only one person is present. Individuals are always embedded within larger systems, whether or not those systems are physically in the room. When working one-on-one, she encourages practitioners to explore family relationships, cultural expectations, and institutional influences that shape the client's experience. This aligns closely with social work's person-environment perspective and is reinforced by Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. For me, this perspective is especially valuable in substance use disorder work. It helps reframe symptoms like cravings, relapse, anxiety, or depression as understandable reactions to systemic stress rather than personal failure. This reframing reduces shame and supports a more collaborative, strengths-based approach to treatment. When working with couples and families, systems theory becomes even more visible. Smith-Acuna emphasizes that repeated conflicts or problematic behaviors often serve a function within the system. These patterns may help regulate emotional distance, manage fear, or maintain predictability, even when they are harmful. In families affected by substance use, these dynamics are often intensified. Instead of asking who is at fault, systems thinking asks what role the behavior plays and how the system responds to it. This perspective is especially useful in child welfare, family preservation, and substance use treatment settings, where blame can increase shame and resistance. By focusing on interactional patterns, practitioners can support change while still holding people accountable in a way that feels fair and respectful. Smith-Acuna also extends systems thinking beyond clients and families to social service organizations themselves. Agencies are systems shaped by policies, funding structures, professional roles, and organizational culture. As someone preparing to work in substance use disorder services, this was especially meaningful. Burnout, high caseloads, and limited resources are often framed as individual problems, but systems theory helps reveal how organizational structures contribute to these challenges. Understanding this reinforces the importance of advocacy and systemic change alongside direct practice. It also encourages practitioners to reflect on their own role within these systems they work in and how they can contribute to healthier organizational patterns. In conclusion, systems theory in action helped me understand systems theory as a practical way of thinking rather than a set of techniques. Smith-Acuna's framework emphasizes context, relationships, and patterns, which aligns closely with the values of social services practice. As someone planning to work as a substance use disorder professional, this perspective will shape how I understand clients, families, and organizations. When combined with ecological perspectives like Bronfenbrenner's, systems theory provides a strong foundation for ethical, effective, and sustainable social services work. Thanks for watching.